In the rolling countryside of Henrico County, Virginia, where endless tobacco rows rippled under the blazing summer sun of 1784, the Caldwell family presided over one of the wealthiest plantations in the state. To outsiders, they appeared flawless, prosperous, cultured, and devout. Yet hidden deep within the walls of their Mill Haven estate was a truth so grotesque that when it surfaced in the winter of 1789, it rattled the very foundations of Virginia's elite society. Court records sealed for more than 2 centuries tell of deliberate fraud, forged papers, and a girl who discovered she had been raised for a purpose darker than anything she could imagine. 23 witnesses described events so appalling that 3 judges refused to hear the case, claiming they were morally unfit to continue. Authorities tried to bury the scandal. The church denied it had ever happened. Surviving relatives abandoned Virginia forever. But truth, as it always does, clawed its way back to the surface. The story centers on Elizabeth Hartwell and the Caldwell family's forbidden design. The surviving documents, forgotten in Richmond's courthouse basement until a clerk stumbled upon them in 1892, were deemed so disturbing that they were sealed again for half a century. It began in 1776, as Virginia reeled from revolution and the promise of freedom. Mill Haven sprawled across nearly 3,000 acres of prized tobacco land held by the Caldwells for 3 generations. Their original land grant, signed in 1722 by Governor Alexander Spotswood, cemented the family as colonial aristocracy. They kept their rank through strategic marriages, shrewd trading, and an unyielding drive to preserve their power. The head of the family, Jonathan Caldwell, was a commanding man, once a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, a wealthy tobacco merchant linked to London and Richmond alike, and a widower whose wife Catherine had died giving birth only months before independence was declared. Tall, broad-shouldered, with streaks of grey in his dark hair and eyes cold as steel, Jonathan carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to absolute control. Catherine had been a Harrison, from one of Virginia's oldest lines. Their union had brought him both wealth and high standing. But after her death, Jonathan's focus shifted entirely to preserving the Caldwell legacy. The revolution disrupted commerce, but Jonathan thrived where others collapsed. While many planters clung to the crown, he calculated that siding with independence would open new doors. His gamble worked. He sold to French traders through Philadelphia contacts, demanded payment in gold and land, and snatched up bankrupt estates. Mill Haven expanded while others crumbled. But wealth wasn't enough. Without a male heir, Jonathan faced the nightmare of his estate being carved apart by distant relatives. His grandfather's letters, preserved in the family chest, had warned, "A fortune divided is a fortune destroyed." Jonathan lived under that commandment. Suitors for remarriage were plentiful, yet he dismissed them. Another wife meant another family's interests competing with his own. He needed not a partner, but someone pliant, someone who would owe everything to him. Then fate intervened. On a stormy November night, Samuel Brigham, the overseer who had served the Caldwells for decades, appeared at Jonathan's study door with grave news. A carriage had overturned near Devil's Elbow. The couple inside, William and Margaret Hartwell, were killed instantly. Their driver was dead as well, but their young daughter Elizabeth had survived. When Jonathan saw her, pale and trembling, seated on a bed in a borrowed gown, he froze. Her features mirrored Catherine's chestnut hair, delicate jaw, and eyes wide with intelligence and sorrow. She thanked the servants politely for their care, speaking with refinement that revealed her upbringing. In that instant, Jonathan's mind turned. She was alone, vulnerable, and most importantly, valuable. "What is your name, child?" he asked gently. "Elizabeth Hartwell," she whispered. "Are my parents truly gone?" Jonathan took her hand with feigned kindness. "Yes, my dear, but you are safe now. We'll find your family." Behind his mask of sympathy, his mind calculated faster than ever before. An orphan of quality, cut off from her kin, had landed at his doorstep. To the world, he would appear a charitable guardian. In reality, she would become the key to securing his dynasty. Jonathan wasted no time turning tragedy into strategy. Within weeks, he presented himself to the county clerk as Elizabeth's guardian, armed with carefully forged papers that claimed her Uncle Thomas, whom she had begged for, had died of fever in the Kentucky backcountry. The timing was flawless, tragic, believable, and impossible to verify. The overworked clerk, impressed by Jonathan's standing in Henrico County, signed off without hesitation. Elizabeth became his legal ward. Outwardly, Jonathan was applauded as a benevolent widower taking in an orphan. Inside Mill Haven, he began shaping her life with meticulous intent. He hired Adelaide Fenwick, an unmarried woman of education from Richmond, to tutor her in literature, history, and music. Ministers instructed her in Latin and scripture, while plantation business provided constant examples of land management and trade. She was clothed beautifully, spoken to with courtesy, and made to believe she had found both safety and fortune in her new home. But Jonathan's aim extended far beyond guardianship. In 1778, he traveled to Richmond to consult his attorney, Cornelius Vance, a discreet, well-compensated man, known for crafting unusual contracts for the elite. There, Jonathan executed two extraordinary maneuvers. First, formal adoption papers. These made Elizabeth legally his daughter, and ensured she could inherit Mill Haven in the absence of other heirs. Society praised him for this generous act. Second, a marriage contract. On its face it looked routine, an agreement for Jonathan Caldwell of Mill Haven to wed a future bride of suitable family and refinement, but the contract deliberately left the bride unnamed. Its vagueness was intentional, a placeholder waiting for the right moment. Vance asked no questions. For him, secrecy was part of the business. Jonathan locked the contract away, keeping it out of public record, while the adoption papers were filed openly. His chessboard was set. As Elizabeth grew, Jonathan poured energy into her education. She learned French, mathematics, social etiquette, and the complex rules of Virginia's elite households. Visitors saw only a proud father ensuring his daughter would be a polished bride one day. Few questioned why she had little exposure to young men her own age or why her interactions beyond Mill Haven were tightly controlled. More troubling was the subtler conditioning. Jonathan repeatedly emphasized loyalty to family above all else. He spoke of biblical patriarchs with unconventional family arrangements, framed as divine will. He reminded her of sacrifices made by Caldwell ancestors to preserve their lands, weaving a narrative in which Elizabeth herself was destined to carry the burden of the family's survival. By 1782, Elizabeth, now 16 and strikingly intelligent and beautiful, had been groomed into seeing Jonathan not only as guardian but as the axis of her world. She believed her future was bound inseparably to his vision. In the spring of 1784, Jonathan set the final stage of his design. One morning he called Elizabeth into his study and presented her with a small portrait framed in gold. "This," he said with measured calm, "is your intended husband, Jonathan Caldwell, your cousin from the western counties. He has land, wealth, and ambition. Our marriage arrangement will unite the Caldwell name and keep Mill Haven intact." Elizabeth studied the miniature. The man in the painting looked unsettlingly familiar. The same strong features, piercing dark eyes, and even the same manner of dress Jonathan himself favored, though slightly outdated. "But his name is the same as yours, Papa," she said softly. "How can that be?" Jonathan's explanation was smooth. "Families often recycled names to honor ancestors," he insisted. This cousin, though successful in tobacco, lacked polish and refinement. By marrying him, she would secure her own position and strengthen both branches of the family. To Elizabeth, the proposal felt strange, but Jonathan reassured her constantly. She would not be leaving him, he explained. Her cousin would eventually move to Mill Haven to help manage the estate. "You will always remain close to those who love you most," he promised. Preparations began, but something felt off. Unlike the lavish celebrations common among Virginia planters, this wedding was to be small, quiet, and private. Jonathan explained that war had left many families scattered, travel was dangerous, and her orphan status made a restrained ceremony more respectable. When she asked about correspondence from her future husband, Jonathan told her he was away on business in the frontier, preferring traditional restraint before marriage. When she asked to see replies to the invitations, Jonathan claimed his lawyer was handling them to avoid burdening her with details. In September, Cornelius Vance arrived at Mill Haven with boxes of papers. Elizabeth was asked to sign documents, inheritance settlements, property deeds, legal transfers, all tied to the marriage. Whenever she tried to read closely, Vance waved off her concerns. "Legal formalities," he said, "nothing more." Jonathan echoed the same, but Elizabeth was no fool. Years of education had given her enough knowledge of law and property to notice contradictions. Some deeds seemed to strip away her rights, shifting her inheritance elsewhere. Jonathan brushed it off as routine legal transition, yet the language was murky, the timing suspicious, and her questions discouraged. Doubts grew stronger when she began noticing inconsistencies. There were no letters from any cousin. Payments to portrait painters and merchants hinted at disguises rather than a groom. And late one October night, while retrieving a book from Jonathan's study, Elizabeth stumbled upon the truth. The portrait of her supposed fiancé lay on the desk, beside a mirror. Jonathan was adjusting his own features, practicing to match the painted pose. Her blood ran cold. The cousin never existed. Jonathan intended to marry her himself, under a fabricated identity. Every lesson, every kindness, every piece of affection had been part of a calculated plan to mold her into his bride. After that night in the study, Elizabeth's world shattered. The cousin was a fiction. Her guardian intended to marry her himself. She needed proof. Quietly, she began her own investigation. During lessons, she skimmed household letters when Miss Fenwick wasn't watching. She asked subtle questions of Martha and the staff about wedding arrangements. What she uncovered confirmed her worst fears. There were no invitations, no correspondence with relatives. Instead, she found bills from a Richmond portraitist for altering an existing miniature, and invoices for wigs and clothing designed to change someone's appearance. The most damning discovery came when she picked the lock on a desk drawer Jonathan kept tightly secured. Inside lay the entire story. The inquiry letters about her parents, unsent, never mailed. Forged guardianship papers naming Jonathan her legal protector. Fabricated correspondence from the imaginary cousin arranging the marriage. Notes in Jonathan's own handwriting detailing their wedding night and plans for their future children. But the most chilling piece was the marriage contract itself, drafted by Cornelius Vance. It named Jonathan Caldwell of Mill Haven as groom, and Elizabeth Hartwell, adopted daughter of said Jonathan Caldwell, as bride. There was no cousin. There never had been.
Reading the document, Elizabeth trembled. Every step of her life had been orchestrated for this moment. She had been raised not as a daughter, but as a bride in waiting. His scheme was airtight. By adopting her first, he secured legal control. By marrying her after, he ensured the estate stayed whole and any children would be legitimate heirs. Jonathan's meticulous notes outlined how they would present themselves publicly as husband and wife, omitting the adoption from conversation. Their children would never know the truth. Society, courts and church would all accept it as lawful. Elizabeth felt sick. She was trapped. She had no allies, no money, no way to prove her identity. Even the very evidence she uncovered could damn her, making her appear complicit in the arrangement. The wedding date, November 15, 1789, loomed only weeks away. Her escape seemed impossible, until a stranger arrived at Mill Haven's gates. On November 3rd, just 12 days before the wedding, fate delivered an unlikely ally. A traveling minister, Reverend Thomas Hartley, appeared at Mill Haven's gates, seeking food and a bed for the night. He was around 50, grey-haired and sun-worn from years of riding rough back roads between scattered parishes. His coat was plain, his manners simple, but his knowledge of Virginia families was vast, earned through decades of baptisms, marriages and burials. At supper, while Jonathan excused himself briefly, Elizabeth seized the chance. Her voice low but steady, she asked, "Reverend, do you know of a family named Hartwell?" Hartley's eyes lit with recognition. "Indeed I do. William and Margaret Hartwell of Norfolk. Good people. A terrible loss. That carriage accident. They often came to my services. They spoke with pride of their daughter Elizabeth, who they planned to take west to live with Margaret's brother Thomas Whitfield, near Harrodsburg. Last I heard, he still runs a trading post there. He's been searching for word of them ever since they vanished." Elizabeth nearly broke. For the first time in 13 years, she heard confirmation. She had living family, and the uncle Jonathan swore had died wasn't an uncle at all, but her mother's brother, and he was still alive. Jonathan soon returned, steering the conversation elsewhere, but Elizabeth had already made her decision. That night, lying awake in her chamber, she pieced together a desperate plan. She couldn't run. Jonathan had too much power, too many eyes watching, but she could expose him, and she would do it in front of everyone on the wedding day. Elizabeth knew she had little time. The wedding was set for November 15th. If she stayed silent, her life would be sealed by Jonathan's scheme forever. She waited until the house was asleep, then slipped quietly into his study. As she expected, Jonathan was awake, bent over his desk, reviewing documents like a general planning a campaign. When he saw her, his expression hardened. "You should be resting," he said. "We have much to prepare for our wedding." The way he stressed the word made her skin crawl. Elizabeth forced herself to meet his gaze. "There is no cousin," she said firmly. "You mean to marry me yourself?" For the first time, Jonathan dropped the mask. The affectionate guardian was gone. In his place stood a cold, calculating man who no longer cared to pretend. "You are sharper than I thought," he admitted. "Yes, there was never a cousin. In 12 days you will be my wife, my heir and the mother of my children. Everything has been arranged. The law cannot touch me." Elizabeth's voice shook, but she pushed forward. "The law will stop you. What you're planning is wrong." Jonathan chuckled, almost amused. "The law? My dear, the law is what men like me decide it is. You are my daughter until marriage, and then my wife after. All properly witnessed, all legally filed. No court in Virginia will challenge it."
Then came the words that nearly broke her. He admitted what she had always feared. "Do you think your parents' carriage accident was chance? I arranged it. They carried gold for land in Kentucky. My men took it, and you were the unexpected prize. When I saw how much you resembled Catherine, I knew Providence had favored me." Elizabeth kept her composure, even as her heart screamed. He believed she was broken, cornered, and his pride, his need to boast, gave her the very weapon she needed. She asked softly, "How did you manage it? How could you be certain of their route, their plans?" Jonathan leaned back, savoring the moment. He told her everything, how William Hartwell bragged too freely in taverns about his gold, how easy it was to arrange an ambush, how thorough his deception had been since. Elizabeth memorized every word. She had no weapon, but now she had something far more dangerous, his own confession, and a witness already in the house, the minister who carried moral weight no court could ignore. From that night on, she prepared. She gathered forged papers, copied incriminating letters, and hid them where Jonathan wouldn't think to look. Each day she smiled and played the obedient bride-to-be, but inside she was building her case. By the time November 15th arrived, she was ready to destroy him in front of every witness he had invited. November 15th, 1789, the great hall at Mill Haven was decorated for the ceremony. Reverend Charles Peaton, a respected minister, stood ready to officiate. A select group of witnesses gathered, neighbors, planters, magistrates, and of course Cornelius Vance. To them, this was an unusual but not unthinkable match, a wealthy guardian marrying his adopted daughter. Elizabeth entered in Catherine's altered ivory gown, pearls in her hair. To the crowd she looked pale but composed, the picture of a dutiful bride. Jonathan stood beside her, smug in his midnight blue coat, convinced his plan was complete. The ceremony began, familiar words echoing through the hall. Then came the minister's question, "If any man can show just cause why these two should not be joined, let him speak now." Elizabeth's voice rang out clear and steady. "I must speak. I am not Elizabeth Caldwell, daughter of Jonathan Caldwell. I am Elizabeth Hartwell. This man murdered my parents and kidnapped me to raise me for this very moment." Gasps swept the room. Jonathan tried to laugh it off, claiming bridal nerves, but Elizabeth had prepared. Calmly, she handed over documents she had gathered, the forged guardianship papers, Jonathan's notes, records of payments to Brigham for the ambush, and the marriage contract naming Jonathan as both father and groom. The guests examined the evidence. Their faces hardened as the truth became undeniable. Then Elizabeth revealed one last secret. Catherine Caldwell, his first wife, did not die in childbirth. She was poisoned. I found her diary and letters from Dr. Fleming describing symptoms of arsenic. He killed her too. The hall erupted. Several magistrates present ordered Jonathan's arrest on the spot. He struggled, protested, accused Elizabeth of madness, but no one believed him anymore. The trial that followed consumed Richmond. Newspapers across the colonies reported it. Jonathan Caldwell, once untouchable, was found guilty of murder, fraud, and kidnapping. On March 15th, 1790, he was hanged before a crowd. Elizabeth inherited Mill Haven, but chose a different path. She tracked down her uncle, Thomas Whitfield, in Kentucky, and reunited with him. Refusing marriage proposals, she devoted her wealth to founding schools for orphans, determined that no child would ever endure what she had. She lived until 1847, passing at age 81, surrounded by children she had saved. At her funeral, governors, senators, and hundreds of former students honored her as a woman who turned personal horror into lasting good. Mill Haven was sold, then abandoned, eventually demolished. Locals whispered the land was cursed, crops failing where Jonathan once ruled. The Caldwell name vanished from Virginia. But Elizabeth Hartwell's name endured as a symbol of courage, intelligence, and defiance against one of the darkest deceptions in early America.